question was asked by, I don't know who asked it, but the question was the following: at what point did Portuguese and Spanish become distinctly separate languages? What made them separate? For example, fazer and hacer have same meaning. This verb is super common in both languages, so how is that one common verb could split into two? They don't sound the same at all either. So for the ones who do not understand Spanish or Portuguese, fazer, I don't know how to pronounce it in Portuguese, and hacer are basically the verb to do in Spanish and Portuguese. And somebody wants to know how Spanish and Portuguese, such similar languages, became separate languages. And that's what I'm covering today. And another question was, how did Portugal become and stay independent of Spain? What are the cultural narratives in Portuguese and Spanish histories? It seemed like the only reason was because Portugal suddenly became rich from overseas colonies, and then Spain never bothered to take it back. And these are the questions I'm about to cover in this video. So this question, at what point did Portuguese and Spanish become distinctly separate languages, can be answered, but I first have to tell you a little bit about the history. So as you can see on this map, Spain and Portugal both are located on the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian Peninsula is the part from the Pyrenees Mountains that kind of splits this peninsula, or separates this peninsula from the rest of Europe. And you have to know that before the Spanish and Portuguese people lived in Spain, well, there were some kind of tribes that lived there, and then the Romans came and they conquered the whole peninsula, and they made Latin the official language. And Latin kind of evolved into different parts. For example, in Italy there were different types of Latin spoken. The spoken Latin, by the way, was called Vulgar Latin, and the Vulgar Latin spoken in Italy was different from the Vulgar Latin spoken in France, and the Vulgar Latin spoken in Catalonia, Spain, and so on. So before the Romans, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Moorish people came into the peninsula from the south of Asia. They were Muslim tribes, and they conquered the southern part of the peninsula. As you can see in maybe I don't know, I don't have a map, but they conquered the peninsula, the southern part of the peninsula. And then during the Reconquista, which is Spanish for reconquest, I guess, I don't know, the Spanish and Portuguese people claimed their land back. They fought against the Moorish people, and they drove them all back to Morocco and Algeria, and they even grabbed some parts of Morocco with them, especially the Spanish people. As you can see right here, Ceuta, it's still a Spanish city, but it's located on the African continent in Morocco. And they have another city. Oh, this is Spanish as well. El Oceima and Melilla. It's another Spanish city. So let's continue. So they drove back the Muslims, the Muslims, and it's called the Reconquista. And the Reconquista is actually it's sort of the period of history of the Iberian Peninsula, and I'm reading this from a scientific page, spanning approximately 770 years between the Islamic conquest of Hispania in 710 and the fall of the last Islamic state in Iberia at Granada to the expanding Christian kingdoms in 1492. Remember, 1492 is also the year Columbus discovered the Americas. The Reconquista ended just before the European discovery of the Americas, which ushered in the era of the Portuguese and Spanish colonial empires, which we all know, and has left its trademark on the modern world today. Because, as you all know, from actually the southern states of the the southern states of the United States, all the way down to Argentina and Chile. It's all Spanish except for Brazil, which is completely which has the official language is Portuguese. So anyways, to go back to the question of how did to go back to the question at what point did Portuguese and Spanish become distinctly separate languages, I will use an answer which is given by Damon A. Podeka on the Quora forum. So, the background. Spanish and Portuguese are both Latinate languages, which I already told you, which are derived from Vulgar Latin, the spoken form of Classical Latin. During the Roman Empire, the citizens of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal likely spoke a somewhat similar dialect of the Vulgar language, Proto-Romans. Following the collapse of the empire, the spoken language differentiated into Western Romance and then into Iberian Romance. There were several conquering tribes following the Romans, but the most important and likely the most influential conquest of Spain and Portugal was the Moorish invasion. The Moors ruled Spain for over 700 years, and the majority of speakers spoke Arabic. By 500 CE, there were 5 main regional dialects of Iberian Romance: Galician, Leonese, Aragonese, Castilian, and Catalan. Those dialects reflected to the kingdoms where they, which existed during that time in Spain, as you can see in this map. Well, the Kingdom of Galicia is left out, but here you can see the Kingdom of Portugal, the Kingdom of Castile, the Kingdom of Aragon, which is now modern-day Catalonia and Valencia, the Kingdom of Granada, and the Kingdom of Navarre. So, Galician, as you can see here, Portuguese is derived from the Galician dialect and modern Spanish, which is also known as Castellano, which is derived from Castilian, the region of the Kingdom of Spain, the Kingdom of Castile, I mean. And, well, to know why it's called Spanish is because when Isabella I, Mary of the Kingdom of Castile, married Ferdinand II of the Kingdom of Aragon, those two kingdoms united, and for just to make things easy, they were both referred to as Spain. And that's why the language called in Latin America is Spanish as well, and not Catalan, because during that time Spanish was the official language. I mean, Castilian was the official language of the Spanish kingdom, and they sort of brought the Spanish language over, not the Catalan language, which is spoken in modern day Catalonia and Valencia. So back to the question. The exact dates of when Portuguese and Spanish became distinctly separate is difficult to say, but there are examples of Galician Portuguese in literature from the 800s CE. Following the establishment of the Kingdom of Portugal, the University of Lisbon was established in 1290 CE, with Portuguese as the official language. So that could be the true point at which Portuguese and Spanish became distinctly separate, officially. I think that's quite, because if I'm not mistaken, Portugal became an independent official country in 1239. So at that point, Portuguese and Spanish became officially separated, but they were most likely to have been separated long before that. Linguistically, there are not a lot of difference between Spanish and Portuguese, especially when comparing written languages as opposed to spoken. And that's true. So now the other question: how did Portugal become and stay independent of Spain? Well, that's actually, as I mentioned before, after they had driven the Moorish people back into Africa, the Portuguese king kind of established Portugal, and he just said, like, okay, this is Portugal, and Portuguese is the official language, nothing else. And then they started to expand overseas, for example Portugal and Brazil and Africa, and they brought slaves from Africa to Brazil, and that's how Portugal became rich, etc. You all know the history. Now, coming back to Spain and Catalonia, that's also the reason why Catalan people feel they are not Spanish, because at some point they were part of the kingdom of Aragon and then the kingdom of Castile, the Spanish kingdom. Basically, they united under one king, queen, and together they conquered the kingdom of Granada and the kingdom of Navarre, and that basically created modern day Spain. And that's basically everything you need to know about Spain. Here you can see the languages again. Castilian Spanish mainly spoken in this part of Spain, Asturian mainly spoken in this part, Galician, which is very close related to Portuguese. At some point Portuguese and Galician were the same language, so it's very close related to Portuguese. Here we got Catalan, which is very close related to French, and we got Basque. Basque is just the word language. Nobody knows where this derived from, or etc. And that's it. It was my first video, so I've tried to make it as interesting as possible, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And please leave a comment, subscribe. I will be, if you have any tips for me, just let me know, leave it in the comments, and I will appreciate that very much. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.